As individuals, it is our obligation to think with a critical mind, to study and ponder, to question all that we read, hear, and are taught. It is our duty to challenge the political persuasion, every political persuasion. This is Session 4, Capitalism, in a companion course titled Economics of Fulfillment, and that is an aspect of a larger view, Evolution of Consciousness Theory. In this session, we look beyond socialism and delve into the modern world's second major economic philosophy, capitalism. In the scarcity-based balance between market forces and central control, nations employ a blend of economic practices. Free market activities take place within a regulatory framework, maintained by government, and enforced by the police power of the state. Here, we narrow our focus to the free market aspect of economic behavior. We draw in on the system of economic beliefs, under which most of us live and work, and that proponents claim offers the individual the freedom to exercise his or her creative power, to the fullest extent of his or her abilities, capitalism. When we look at capitalism with a critical eye, however, the freedom it offers may be less tangible than we have been led to believe. The capitalist model is based on the idea that we can best achieve our economic ends by letting our needs directly dictate economic activity by the market. Whereas in socialism, the individual has no motivation other than social conformity to contribute to the economy, in capitalism, the individual has an economically direct motivation to contribute profit, the ability to get more out of an economic activity than we put into it. Driven to turn a profit, we create or identify markets and supply goods and services targeted to those markets. Central to this process is capital. Textbooks define capital as the body of goods and monies from which we derive wealth, or a bigger body of goods and monies. But capital means something more, opportunity. In a capitalist economy, control over capital gives the individual the means to raise a family, start a business, earn an education, market an invention, or in some way transform skills, dreams, and ambitions, as diverse as we may experience them, into activity, and by doing so, to earn a living and contribute to the economy. Capital is the nutrient-laden blood of capitalism. The problem with the capitalist model, of course, is that not everyone has access to capital, and thus to the freedom to contribute to the economy to the extent of his or her abilities. To understand this, we need to look at the mechanism of capitalism, in particular, at something called the capital cycle. Say we have $100,000 and invest our money by building a house. When finished, our house includes $50,000 of labor and $50,000 of land and materials. Now, say, due to market conditions, we sell our house for $150,000. By virtue of the relationship between supply and demand, or cost and what people are willing to pay, we turn a $50,000 profit. But there is more to capitalism than revenues minus expenses. We made money, but where did our profit, the extra $50,000, come from? The difference between what we put into the economy and what we got out of the economy came from a transfer of wealth within the economy. We ended up with $50,000 more capital, and the economy, excluding ourselves, ended up with $50,000 less capital. Factors such as money supply, inflation, deflation, and the value added by our management and the reshaping of raw materials into a finished product influence this situation, but they do not change the mechanism. We now have more resources, and thus freedom to creatively express ourselves and contribute to society and the economy, and everyone else has less. As this process repeats, capital concentrates in the hands of fewer and fewer individuals. We have the situation Marx grappled with more than a century ago, and we see throughout the world today: the rich get richer, and the poor get poorer. Wealth concentration is not a function of greed and human failing, though greed and human failing may come into play. Wealth concentration is an intrinsic, inescapable characteristic of a profit-driven market economy. Because of the mathematical certitude with which wealth will concentrate in a profit-driven market economy, a mechanism must exist to redistribute capital. Beneath all its layers of legal, political, accounting, and regulatory complexity, capitalism is nothing more than a scheme to create opportunity, and thus economic activity, by capital redistribution. Capitalism is a system that, over the last several centuries, has evolved to cycle wealth from areas of the economy where it has accumulated, to areas where it can be put to work, the capital cycle. In the pursuit of capital redistribution, economies employ a variety of techniques to facilitate access to capital, or to manage the flow of the capital cycle. The most important are a nation's banking system and its bond, stock, and other exchanges. By the promise of shared profits, banks and exchanges give the individual access to the money needed to start a business, earn an education, develop an invention, or in some way play a role in the economy. To a lesser extent, nations provide capital through tax or charity-funded social programs, welfare, unemployment, and other social services. The better a nation or economy's mechanisms of capital redistribution, and thus the greater the opportunity the average individual has to play a role in the economy, the better the economy works, the less inequitably the pie is sliced, and the more the pie increases in size. As anyone who has started a business knows, however, money can be hard to come by. Due to a natural reluctance to put investment funds at risk, an economy's mechanisms of capital redistribution are not available to all members of the economy. This is particularly true in a global economic environment. At one time, economic activities took place largely within a nation's territorial, and thus legal boundaries, and government could to some extent oversee the availability of investment capital, through fiscal and monetary policy, and the regulation of banks and exchanges. More important, there was land and other non-monetary forms of capital available, the frontier. Today, capital changes hands with little regard to political borders, and virtually every resource has a monetary value. As important, political interests limit the availability of capital to favored economic segments. A multinational business may have no problem raising the money to open a factory, or to build a chain of retail stores. If a family who wants to start a business can get a loan at all, it may have to secure it with the family home. Socialistic methods of wealth redistribution have proven even less effective. Welfare and other entitlements make so little capital available to the average individual that they do almost nothing to create economic opportunity. A person on the dole may have the money to buy groceries, but not the money to open a grocery store. Moreover, excessive socialistic wealth redistribution, as when taxes are high, draws funds out of the capital redistribution cycle, diluting capital to the point where it becomes harder to pool enough to invest. Economic activity declines. Unemployment and the demand for social services increases, as does government's call for still higher taxes to pay for them. Social programs keep people afloat, stabilize demand forces, and maintain the social stability necessary for a market economy to function, but do little to fuel economic activity and create wealth. When methods of capital redistribution break down, we experience the situation we increasingly see throughout the world today. Markets lock in speculation. The opportunities available to the average individual decrease. Investment money is available, but to an elite. Capitalism works, but for the few. Capitalism cannot function to its theoretical optimum without a mechanism to provide the average individual with access to capital. and overcoming the legal, cultural, and political barriers to create a workable mechanism, and the regulatory structure to support such a mechanism, on the global scale of today's economy, may not be possible, arguably desirable. By virtue of the profit motive, and a greater acceptance of freedom and individuality, capitalism is a more vital way to conduct our economic affairs than socialism. The capitalist model has lifted civilization into the modern world and increased the standard of living across economic classes. Nonetheless, in the capitalist model, we value the human being as a commodity, the labor element in the land, labor, and capital division talked about in the economic text. By virtue of the capital cycle, and the way in which we assess risk and return, and if we value ourselves as more than the labor, we market ourselves to management and the moneyed elite to provide. Capitalism is a limited economic philosophy. Can the capital cycle, and the relationship between capital and opportunity, explain the booms and busts of the business cycle? As the universe crosses the threshold to meaning, is scarcity-based economics relevant? Is socialism obsolete? Is capitalism obsolete? With our look at capitalism, we complete session 4, in our course titled Economics of Fulfillment. We have the background to venture beyond the universe's age of understanding. As humankind crosses the threshold to meaning, economics will no longer be dominated by politics, conflict, and central control. Economics will no longer function through ideals of scarcity, competition, and a struggle to survive. There will be no winners and losers, divisions of opportunity, and economically driven military turmoil. Economic philosophy will embrace the inherent worth and creative potential of every human being, and economics for the age of fulfillment. Our course on the economics of tomorrow continues in session 5, Assumptions.